The article titled Impact of Malaysian Palm Oil on Sustainable Development Goals, Core Benefits and Trade-offs Across Mitigation Strategies discusses the positive and negative impacts of palm oil production in Malaysia. On the one hand, palm oil has contributed to poverty alleviation, economic growth, alternative energy, food security, and long-term employment opportunities. On the other hand, palm oil production has also been associated with human rights issues, environmental impacts, and biodiversity loss. Additionally, the article also discussed current efforts and strategies to overcome issues surrounding palm oil. The African oil palm, being an important commodity, is a source of edible oil, and the manufacture of many products depend on palm oil as a raw material. Palm oil is significant to the economic growth of Malaysia. Despite the many positive impacts which have been the result of the palm oil industry, there remains to be various issues surrounding palm oil which were discussed and reviewed in the article.
The article is a meta-analysis of existing research in the literature concerning the research questions described. 234 articles were reviewed and were obtained using the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses Prisma platform. The authors categorized the impacts of palm oil in Malaysia into four main areas: health, socioeconomics, environment, and biodiversity. These areas were then mapped to specific Sustainable Development Goals (SDG) keywords. Palm oil is a widely used cooking oil that is high in saturated fats. However, the health effects of palm oil consumption are contentious. Some studies show that palm oil increases risk of cardiovascular disease, while others tout benefits from palm oil phytonutrients. Palm oil does contain tocotrienols and carotenoids, which are important in processing micronutrients. The industry has created jobs and boosted rural incomes, helping to reduce poverty, reduce wealth inequality, and improve food security. Despite that, the industry has also been associated with social conflict, environmental degradation, and human rights abuses. Human and labor rights abuses, such as the exploitation of migrant workers, have been associated with the palm oil industry. The palm oil industry's social and economic impacts are multifaceted and are neither positive nor negative. The conversion of forests into oil palm plantations has led to increased greenhouse gas emissions, soil erosion, and microclimate, as well as regional climate changes, which directly lead to the decline of biodiversity, affecting certain species more than others. Efforts are focused on the following aspects: policies and regulation, sustainable plantation management that protects biodiversity, and more efficient processing of oil palm at the downstream level. With regards to implementation and plantations, the following are especially crucial: the establishment of forest corridors and riparian buffer zones, practicing intercropping in oil palm plantations, and finally, biological pest control as opposed to the use of pesticides. First, the article has no primary data. The evidence was collected by reviewing articles or current research, which are secondary sources. The researchers should put more efforts into collecting primary data by doing interviews, surveys, questionnaires, or even experiments. This can avoid the heavy reliance on secondary sources, which limit the scope of study.
Moving on to the critiques, the article research questions did not have any noticeable weakness. Hence, I will be covering on the strong points instead. The first research question is the impacts of palm oil on health. It has sophisticated elaborations throughout its main points. In this case, the target population was specified as consumers, and aspects of health were specified as well, such as cardiovascular disease and cancer. Technical terms of medical were used, which could actually backfire as the readers might fail to understand the paper. However, this wasn't the case, as the terms were clarified in simpler terms. The second research question is the impacts of palm oil on social and economic aspects. The author covered both of the pros and cons. Example of pros would be promoting national economic growth, alleviating poverty, and procuring food security. Example of cons is causing social conflicts between indigenous people and large corporations. Other than that, data are also utilized in the main ideas, such as percentages, numerical values, and timelines. The third research question is the impacts of palm oil on the environment and biodiversity. Like prior research questions, the approach of various data and specific terminologies usage was employed. Authors also covered both biotic and abiotic components of environment as well as both flora and fauna. This increases the scope of the discussion to every essential bit of the research question's focus without missing out on any points. Lastly is the ways to overcome the impacts of palm oil. Efforts from multiple parties were mentioned, such as governmental entities, smallholders, and individuals. Suggested approaches are able to minimize the negative impacts of palm oil pertaining to biodiversity loss, whilst maintaining its benefits. The strategies mentioned in the article prove the possibility of achieving SDGs without having to compromise other goals. Next is the methodology critique. Several weaknesses of the methodology used were displayed throughout the article. Firstly, there is a lack of proper quality assessment. The authors claim that 234 articles were reviewed for the meta-analysis, but it doesn't provide information on the quality assessment of these studies. This raises doubts about the quality of the findings and could lead to biased results. Secondly, there is limited transparency in search strategy. The authors state that systematic search was conducted using the Prisma platform, but specific details of the search strategy aren't provided. A transparent search strategy is essential to minimize the risk of missing relevant studies and potential bias in study selection. Thirdly, mapping to SDGs. The process of mapping the impacts to specific SDGs may not be standardized and could vary among researchers. This may introduce subjectivity and interpretation biases, leading to conclusions drawn being influenced. Lastly, there is an absence of comparative analysis. The impacts of palm oil production were not compared to other vegetable oil production systems or alternative land uses. A comparative analysis is essential as it could provide broader perspective on the relative sustainability of palm oil and its trade-offs in comparison to other options.
Accurately, the authors acknowledge the raising awareness that comes from setbacks of oil palm expansion has resulted in many efforts initiated to mitigate the adverse manifestations of oil palm industry, such as deforestation. Accordingly, sustainability concerns have been raised following the rapid expansion of areas for oil palm that resulted in huge-scale deforestation. In short, efforts from all social entities in addressing topics and issues related to oil palm in the country are crucial to put a spotlight onto the distressing effects of excessive land exploitation arises from oil palm plantation. The authors also point out the perception on palm oil industry that are highly polarized. The assumption made was that the anti-palm oil stance from the EU and the US governing bodies are likely due to exaggerate attention on the negative effects coming from irresponsible practices on oil palm plantations. A study also shows that the consumption of hybrid palm oil also has the same effect on human plasma lipid like extra virgin olive oil. While one might argue that the analysis above to be biased, the enforcement body should allocate more resources to hire independent experts to evaluate palm oil thoroughly to ensure no prejudice is involved in environmental and bioeconomic impact studies of palm oil production, as failure to do this would undermine the positive and often necessary socio-economic benefits of these industries to producer countries and the local communities.
In conclusion, the article has strong research questions on the impacts of palm oil on health, environment, social and economic aspects. However, its methodology has weaknesses. Lacking quality assessment and transparency in a search strategy, it heavily relies on secondary resources, limiting its scope. To improve credibility, the authors should implement quality assessment, transparent search strategy, and collaborate with experts in sustainable development. The results highlight negative impacts of oil palm expansion, industry perception, and health aspects, emphasizing the need for objective assessment by outside experts. The article also discusses Malaysian palm oil production's effects, including advantages and concerns. Future studies should focus on long-term environmental impact assessments, sustainable practices, policy effectiveness, and regional studies.